Do you have a clicker for me?
She has it up front.
Oh, okay.
Just make sure that it's on.
Is that clicker on?
It's on the side of it.
Yes, it is.
Okay, good.
All right, welcome everybody. Is it a great day or what? Woo! All of us at Park Office Center are rocking the house, aren't we?
We are!
Woo! All right, welcome to our Power Lunch. I'm just thrilled about this one. We are just very honored to have two of our favorite full-time clients here at Park Office Center. In fact, right around the corner is their full-time office. And I want to also make sure that I say hi to everybody else at all the other centers. Welcome to all of you too. We get to listen to, we're all going to learn what to say when you don't know what to say. How cool is that? I'm actually just thrilled to introduce our Firefly Sisterhood gals. This is a community-based nonprofit organization whose mission is to foster one-to-one connections between women recently diagnosed with breast cancer and inspirational survivors. Their volunteer mentors receive training and mentoring skills to prepare them to support women facing the challenges of diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship. It's an amazing organization. We see them at work every day. Both presenters, Newcomer, Kris,
Okay.
is the executive director, and Jenny Cook, she's the program manager. And they know that it's hard to figure out what to say when you don't know what to say. They have spent many hours practicing, trying not to fix everything with their family, friends, and breast cancer survivors. Now, there's some fun facts about these girls. When not talking to people about Firefly, Kris is busy wandering aimlessly in the woods with her two black labs.
Yeah.
And when not matching a recently diagnosed woman with an inspirational survivor, Jenny oversees, get this, her 17-year-old pet turtle, a snake,
Yes.
and then, of course, her spouse.
Yes. It's debatable which one takes more work.
So with that, let's welcome them.
Sorry.
Do I have it?
Go for it.
Okay, so what to say when you don't know what to say. The reason we came up with that is everyone's been in a situation where you're like, oh, I'm so sorry. My friend had breast cancer and she was okay. Totally wrong thing to say. Or, God, your son dropped out of college. Boy, my son's doing really, really well in college. So, it's this idea that what to say and how to say it is really, really helpful when someone's in a situation that is really tough, like facing a breast cancer diagnosis. So that's what we're going to talk about today. What to say. So just a little bit about Firefly is our vision is a world where no one faces breast cancer alone. There's nothing worse than having no one to talk to. And our mission is to foster one-to-one connections between women recently diagnosed with breast cancer and an inspirational survivor. And I think it's that connection between someone who's been there and someone who's going through it that makes our work so successful. So that's what we do. What we do is we match people. We are basically a matchmaking organization. We are community-based. We always match by hand. Originally, it was the idea that maybe we could be the match.com of peer mentoring. And then we realized quickly that we needed to have somebody involved with that. And that is Jenny, our program manager, who is a licensed OT and a social worker. So it's nice to have that person. We're organic, so we don't prescribe what this match is going to look like. Just like when you're talking to your friends, you might text, you might email, you might talk on the phone, you might meet for coffee. All of those things, we don't say you have to meet 3 times, you have to have these conversations. We really let the match define itself. It's pretty fluid, how long it takes. It could be 3 emails, it could be 6 phone calls, it could be, we're done, but we're best friends. So we allow that fluidity to happen. All of our volunteer mentors, who we call guides, and we use the term guides because in Fireflies light the dark and guides light the way when you're going through breast cancer. So some people say, well, where did you get that name? And that's where it came from. And as I said, we have licensed support staff. So that's really what makes it different for us. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the power of that survivorship and how the training that we take our peer mentors through, how you could use some of that training when you are stuck in that situation of, I don't know what to say. Because a lot of those skills are really kind of stopping and thinking about how do you phrase those questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenny.
Perfect. Hi, welcome. Come on in. No, you're just fine. And there are some handouts too at the front desk. Maybe we can grab a few extras and bring them in. So hi everybody, again, my name is Jenny Cook, and as Kris mentioned, I'm the program manager at Firefly. I'm also essentially the matchmaker, and I have all of these conversations with women who reach out to us to be matched, and I also do all of that training of our mentors. And so as we go through this today, we've actually taken a section of our curriculum that's about an hour and a half, and we've condensed it down to about an hour. And what we love about this training is that it's really universal. We do the training with the guides, talking about these mentorship skills with that lens of breast cancer, but the skills themselves are skills everyone can use in their day-to-day life, whether it's with family or friends in the workplace. They're just really good people skills to have. And so we'll walk through all of these same dynamics just in a little bit of a condensed format. This is why we've also given you handouts. Please feel free to take notes. If you're interested in getting the slides later, we're happy to share them too, but most of this content is in those handouts that we have for you. So to start out, I want each of you to think about a stressful time that you went through in your life. Maybe it was medical, maybe it was family stress or work. Just conjure up a little bit of what that was like, and then think about someone who was really supportive of you during that experience. Anybody want to share maybe just a word or two of what that person represented, what that support looked like?
Great listener.
Ah, a great listener. Good. Hope. Someone who provided hope. Absolutely. That light at the end of the tunnel, right? That you can't always see when you're in it.
You hope it's not a train.
Maybe a little perspective. Is it, right? What's coming at me? Is it something huge? Is it something small? Great example. Any others?
When people don't tell you how you should be feeling, that's often very helpful too.
Yeah, non-judgmental, right? Somebody who just listens, is supportive, and doesn't say, you should feel this or you should do this. Absolutely. And those are the kinds of things that you'll see are interspersed as we go through this training and that we expect out of our mentors when they're in this relationship. So I wanted to show you some of the really common themes, and I think some of the ones you've talked about will be here as well as some others. Deep conversations with the right people, right? Those conversations where you walk away and think, oh, I have it all figured out now. And it's because this really wise person sat with you and thought this through with you. Right? It might be the person who literally brings you a meal, does something really concrete to provide that support besides just listening. Somebody who might speak up can be courageous, also that listener, really just to be quiet and listen. That takes courage. We don't always like to lean into these hard conversations, right? A lot of people just run away when there's something hard. Like Kris's example, I'm really sorry, and I don't know what else to say, right? So I've got people who lean in, who take part in that hard part. That's really courageous. That, I think, is the non-judgmental, right? Like, I accept you even when it's the ugly cry, right? Even when you are lost and angry, whatever that is, they just take you as you are. Might be someone who physically is there with you. Hi there. It's not where you go, it's who goes with you, right? That makes a huge difference in whatever experience or journey you're going through. The people that are beside you can really change your perspective and your experience itself. Sometimes it's the cheerleader, just the person who's there, rah, 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 right? Sometimes that's what we need. So support can really be a lot of things. Again, this non-judgmental, unbiased, really open in a lot of different ways. And when you're in that position to be the supporter, it can be hard to know which one of these things is the right thing to provide. So when we work with our guides, we use this idea of guardrails. It's essentially like boundaries. And so the idea at Firefly or in Firefly or any of these difficult conversations is the idea that you're going through this unfamiliar, scary territory side by side with someone. At the same time, in hard situations or in hard conversations, you have to be a little bit protective of yourself as well. And that can be especially important if it's a work relationship, maybe even a family or friend. If you get outside of your typical role or boundaries, it can make that relationship really awkward going forward. So we always talk about the importance of these guardrails, right? These boundaries that keep us within what we should be doing as the supporter. So these are all things we've talked about already: being empathetic, validating. Sometimes it is brainstorming ideas about how to solve a problem that's come up, providing comfort. We'll talk more about confidentiality, being flexible, right? When people are in these chaotic situations, we have to just ride along with them a little bit and be really flexible with what they might need. It can be a little bit hard to anticipate. And then if we've got guardrails that keep us in and the things we should be doing in the middle, the things we ask our guides and supporters in general to stay away from are all of the things outside of the guardrails. Not judging, not being the therapist, right? This is typically informal support that you're providing. You're not there to be the mental health expert, right? Is anybody in this room licensed for that kind of stuff? Just making sure, because sometimes there are, and then again, boundaries would be important. But keeping all of these things in mind, offering advice, challenging medical decisions. Most often when someone comes to you with a really difficult situation, they really don't want your answers, right? Most often they want your listening and your help to help them find their answer and their right solution. Another important one is dismissing feelings and emotions. One of the challenging things when we're in these hard positions is knowing the right thing to say. And even with the best of intentions, sometimes we can be dismissive. It's saying things like, yeah, I know this really sucks, but it's not that bad, right? You're trying to be encouraging and hopeful, or it's going to be fine. You're going to be great. Don't worry. But the reality is, I am worried. I don't know if I'm going to be great. So being really thoughtful about what we say and how we say it. And that one in particular, being really sensitive to how what you say may not be as supportive as you think it might be. So I mentioned confidentiality. This is a really complex dynamic at this point. I think most of us know what I call the Vegas definition of confidentiality, right? What happens in this room stays in this room. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That's kind of the cultural understanding of confidentiality that we all subscribe to. However, we live in a day and age where it's much more complicated than that. You know, can I ask you about this on Facebook, right? Can we have this conversation at work or in a restaurant? Maybe it's a conversation about family and you can't have that phone call at 7 o'clock at night. So really being thoughtful and having an actual conversation with the person you're supporting about what does this confidentiality mean to you, right? Who is it that knows about this, right? Am I the only one? Am I a part of a team that's supporting you that it is or isn't okay to connect with? Again, can I bring this up in email? Can I text you about it? What if your spouse or your child sees that text? So we have to be much more thoughtful about the dynamics of confidentiality. And the reason that this obviously is so important is that that confidentiality is what creates trust in that relationship. And if you make a misstep with that confidentiality, it really can undermine your whole relationship, both in this issue that you're supporting them with and potentially long-term, right? If you have that person that makes a significant misstep and breaks your trust in a time of crisis, the likelihood of healing that relationship down the road is much more difficult. So it's worth having these, I call them kind of the awkward first date conversations. We talk about in Firefly with breast cancer in particular, women are very eager to share their stories. And I think that's true universally too. If you finally find someone who's willing to really listen to you, you're very likely to just dump the whole story. But as the supporter, it's important to slow that person down a little bit, right? To say, I really want to hear about this, but before we talk about that, I really want to understand and set some expectations about confidentiality and what this support and this relationship and this role looks like. And most people will say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. right? We should probably do that. But it takes the supporter most times to put the brakes on a little bit and just slow things down. So very, very important to do that. And obviously the limits of confidentiality, if you have someone where it is more of a mental health issue, if you're really worried about somebody's physical safety, their mental health, well-being, those kinds of things, you may have to put some structure around just how far that confidentiality carries, right? And what it looks like if you need to tell someone else, whether it's a physician or helping them access a mental health resource, you really want to be open about what your limits of comfort are with that. Does that all make sense so far?
Mhm.
Right? Confidentiality, we see it, and we all think, oh yeah, I know that. And then we stop and really talk about it, and you realize how complicated it really can be. So definitely worth the conversation. The other piece to really keep in mind is that each of you are going to bring your own personal experiences into this supporter role. And those are incredibly helpful, right? That's the basis of where you can share some of your wisdom, some of your experience. But it's also important to remember that sometimes people process things a lot differently than you would. And it doesn't mean that you can't be a supporter for them, but it does mean that you might have to be thoughtful about your lens or your knee-jerk reaction to certain things. So people, when they're in this stressful situation, some are very open, right? We all know the people on Facebook or Twitter who share and overshare and floodlight and tell you too much, right? And people who are super, super private. You might be the first person they've even given any inkling that there's an issue to. Neither one of those is right or wrong. It's just a difference in how we process. Blaming yourself, looking for others to blame, right? You can see where your perspective might be really different. And I would say most of us move through these spectrums as well. When you're in this stressful area, does it create that fight or flight or freeze, right? Are you the person that rallies and goes and fight? Or are you somebody who needs to just kind of collect your village and be thoughtful about these responses? Somebody who researches all of the options, or who has their first plan, sticks with it, and they're good to go. Right? This is a classic example in the breast cancer world and even in the medical world, right? The people who really want second, third, fourth opinions. If you're that person and the person you're supporting is like, I've got my plan, I'm good to go, you can still be a great support person. But you're probably going to have to check that knee-jerk reaction of, don't you want a second opinion? Or, ooh, have you looked into this yet? That's not your role. So you have to be thoughtful about that. People who need time to process and people who need answers and responses immediately. It's a big difference. And it might be that you really have to ask. If this is a different role than you've been in with this individual in the past, maybe you've never been in the supporter role. Maybe you've never seen this person in kind of a crisis or chaotic situation. Tell me how you process things, right? Do you need time or do you like to get answers right away? Just asking that. Most people have pretty good insight into that. And if they don't, you asking the question will get them thinking. So if you're not sure where someone's at or you're not sure where you're at, start that conversation just to see so that you're on the same page and you know what to expect. And again, thinks it through or talks it out, right? Some of us are very internal with how we process these things. And it might be, like Kris said, some of those, just a couple of check-ins. Maybe that's all the support your person is going to need. It might be that your person is a talk it out person and they're going to want to talk to you once a week to really process things. So understanding that is really, really important for the support you'll provide. And then, of course, all of the emotions that you go through when you're in a really stressful situation. And these can all happen not just within a matter of days, sometimes within the same day, sometimes within the same hour, depending on what's going on. And that roller coaster itself is really, really scary, but it's really normal. And so what we talk about is how important it is to be moving through all of these kinds of feelings. When we have people who are really getting stuck, especially with despair, sadness, those kinds of things, that's when our guts start to feel uncomfortable. We're not sure if it's maybe a red flag or, again, outside of that guardrail. And so you want to be thoughtful about those kind of flags that come up or those concerns that you have. If this is kind of a normal process, what is outside of that normal process? And what I typically talk about is gauging it by one, your gut, right? That's your best thing to trust. But then two, also how easily can you move that person, right? So if you have somebody who you've just talked to and they're really down, they're really upset, is that the only conversation you've had like that? Or has this been a pattern over several conversations? And you might say to them, gosh, it sounds like things are really, really hard right now. Let's get back to that, but for just a minute, let's talk about one thing that's gone really well this week. Right? If they come with you and we'll talk to you a little bit about that, that's a really good sign. If they pull you right back into the muck, that's much more of a flag. And that's where you're going to want to reach out to more professional and trained support. That's going to be likely outside of your role as a supporter, but you might help them engage with those things and be able to say, gosh, this really is outside of my knowledge and my comfort zone. I'd like to help you find someone that you can talk to about these really heavy things who's better equipped to help you with that, right? Again, you're not just ditching them because it's hard. It feels supportive, but it's also providing some safety and keeping you within those guardrails. So again, one of the pieces that's not always comfortable to talk about, but is really important to keep in mind. So if we're going to be having all of these conversations, we need to figure out what to say, what to ask, right? So again, here's our guardrails about listening, trusting your gut, exploring, which we'll do with these questions, and the things we've already talked about a little bit on the outside edge. Any questions so far? All right, we will jump into these questions now because that's really the core of how to have these conversations. Maybe we'll jump. We'll give it a second. So you guys have the handout with the circle on the front is the first one that ties into these questions. There we go. And I want you to keep in mind too, we're about to dive into questions and listening tactics that are really meant for the deeper conversations. If somebody has just a basic question or a simple kind of issue, not everything requires this deep dive, but in those deeper conversations, this can be really helpful information. So we really look at 4 different types of questions as we do our training. And one thing to keep in mind is that they're really fluid, right? That's why they're in a circle. We present them linearly, how do you even say that? We present them in an order because it makes it easy to talk about.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm a little jet lagged yet. So anyway, but we recognize that sometimes the questions will lead you back to a different point in that circle. Okay, so just know that some of these there will be ebb and flow with, but we want to have some structure to the conversation. And in general, there is kind of a first process that you'll go through. So the first type of question we talk about are these discovery questions. And there's examples of these in your handouts. But discovery questions are the kinds of questions that help you pull back the layers of the onion, so to speak. They help you really understand what's going on, what the context is, and is what you're seeing at the surface really what the issue is. So the example I always use is of like the tween, early teenage, maybe girl or boy who comes home from school, is super angry, throws their backpack down and says, I hate school, and thunders up the stairs. And you're like, whoa, right? What just happened? In your brain, you're probably already thinking, oh, he had that math test that was really hard, or gosh, I know she's been struggling with her friend. You're already starting to come up with some assumptions about what might be going on. But before you jump in with those assumptions, you really want to make sure that you know that you understand what's going on. Otherwise, any suggestions or comments that you make really might be off base for the situation, right? So discovery questions are kind of the peeling back. Tell me more about what's going on. And just like there's this kind of standard Vegas definition of confidentiality, I think most of us know the standard definition of what makes a good question, right? Anybody have a guess as to what makes a good question? So like a quality that makes for a good question. This is like HR training that I bet everybody's had, right? Open-ended sound familiar to anybody, right? The good question, that's okay. She's like, I know, it's so much.
I was thinking, I'm like, what?
So, right, we have this standard understanding, well, as long as it's open-ended, it's a good question. Well, it doesn't always mean that it's the right question, and it doesn't always mean that it's easy to do. So the disclaimer that I always give is I have like 20 plus years of speaking with open-ended questions. I recognize that it's automatic in most cases for me, but it's not for everybody. So as we go through these, you'll see that most of them are written in a way that's really open. It's not going to land you with a yes or a no. But just remember, as you go through conversation, if you ask a yes or no, the beautiful thing is if you hit that wall, you can just ask another question, right? And if you say, well, gosh, is it that you had a really bad math test? Well, no. Okay, well, you still get to ask another question, right? So you don't fail if you have a closed-ended. But I encourage you to try the open-ended questions because it does generate better conversation. So the the response I give for everybody who reaches out to Firefly, one of the first things I say is, tell me whatever you're comfortable sharing about your breast cancer experience. It's really inviting, right? Tell me about that. It's also safe, whatever you're comfortable sharing. And it generates that conversation. So those are the kinds of things you'll ask. It might also be the what else questions, right? Well, what else happened? Well, what else happened? Well, then what happened, right? Until you get to know that's it. That's everything that happened. Then you're going to have a pretty good understanding of the context in which you're working and in which whatever this stressful situation is taking place, okay? The next step after you've really figured out what the core issue is are these exploration questions. And that's where that earlier slide talked about kind of that gentle exploration of what's been going on. These provide an opportunity to challenge assumptions, both your assumptions and theirs, right? It might be saying, gosh, I remember that you've really been having a tough time with your best friend, right? Is that contributing to this? Is that related to this? How does that play in? Or does it? She might say, no, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Then at least you know that that's not a piece of it. Sometimes it's their assumptions, right? You may have a broader perspective and you may be able to say, gosh, you're assuming that your spouse is responding this way because of X, Y, and Z. Could it be something else that's causing that response? Oh, right? That's that wisdom and that insight that someone who has a broader perspective can bring than when you're just in it and really focused on your experience and not necessarily looking more broadly. And again, you can surface these kinds of patterns of thinking. One of the examples we'll use sometimes is, gosh, I've noticed that every time we talk before you go to chemo, you're really stressed about work. Could there be a correlation between those things? Whatever these patterns are that you can see happening, or every time your mother-in-law is coming to visit, you get really excited, right? Maybe that's the case. And maybe you're seeing a pattern that the person who's living it can't see. And it's a great role for you to be able to share some of that insight of what you're seeing as these broader patterns or what you might be able to anticipate is coming that someone else who's in it just doesn't have on their radar yet. And once you've really then understood what the issue is, all of the context, you're really clear on what the problem is, what, if anything, are you going to do about it, right? These are the action questions. And I will be honest with you, and I think we've all been in these situations, sometimes people don't want to even deal with the action, right? Sometimes it's just the venting. And so getting into action questions is also going to give you some insight as to whether or not anything's going to change about this right now, or if they just needed to vent. And you can even say that. Gosh, that's a lot. I know this is really a difficult situation. Are there steps that you want to take to tackle this, or do you really just need to vent today? And if they say, yeah, I really do want to change this, it's going to be a different conversation with, no, I feel better now, right? Which we sometimes, just having that ability to have that hard conversation and not do anything about it can be helpful. But for the people who really do want to take some action, we want to help them create that plan, right? It's kind of that coaching and mentoring model at its core. The most effective plan that you'll ever come up with to solve a problem is something where the person in the problem creates the plan, right? If you go through and say, well, what I think you should do is 1, 2, 3. right? They go do 1, 2, and 3, and it's successful. Hooray, right? You look like the hero. You solved it all. It's great. If they go do 1, 2, 3, and it fails, you also own that. And the likelihood is nobody's going to go do 1, 2, 3 unless it's their own plan. So these are the kinds of questions that help them explore those options. It might be some brainstorming. It might be pros and cons lists, right? This question up here, if you didn't have to worry about whatever the situation is, what would you do? Kind of that magical thinking, right? If you had a magic wand, how would this turn out? Well, now that we know how you want it to turn out, what steps do you need to take to get there, right? And so each of these conversations is really important because it's going to be so individualized. And sometimes people come up with their plans very clearly. In other situations, they're really still muddled and they're not sure what to do. So you can help provide some clarity just by asking them these kinds of questions. And like I said, if it's their plan, that's huge for empowerment, right? If they're successful, they own all of that success. And you can point that out to them. You came up with this plan, you followed through on all of it, and now you've resolved whatever this issue is, and it's all through your hard work, right? All through your efforts. That is definitely going to build somebody up who's probably been broken down by a really stressful situation. If it hasn't been successful, you can go back to the drawing board. Gosh, you tried these 3 things. We thought that was going to be the right step. I'm so sorry it didn't work. What do you think we could do differently? Right? What do you think the next step should be? So important questions to ask, and again, keeps you a little bit off the hook if it's a failure, right? Which frankly is really important. And then you can be the cheerleader and celebrate if it's a success. Now, if you've gone through these action questions, it's really, really important that you understand what your role is in that plan. And that's what we call the directed support questions. This is all about clarifying expectations, right? If your expectation is that I'm going to walk through this with you, we need to be really clear about that, because if there's a misstep or the expectations aren't fulfilled, again, that's another situation where you can really break that trust. So making sure you know, what's my role in this? Are there pieces you want me to help with this? Do you want me to go to that meeting? Do you want me to check in with you in a week? How do you see me supporting you in this plan? And some people will give you very clear, like, yes, it would be great if you were at that meeting, or hey, how about I call you in a week? Some people might say, I'm good. Let me just give this a shot and we'll see how it goes and I'll circle back. That's fine too, but then at least you know, and you're not likely to disappoint them. You might identify other people to connect them with who could help them, other resources, whether it's in the community or in the workplace. You know, we think about employee assistance programs, things like that. Whatever the other resources are that somebody could use, if you know about them, you don't have to hold them back. You can offer them and then allow them to choose if that's something that they'd like to use. But this is a great time to redirect to other resources if it's more appropriate. And again, clarify that follow-up, right? How can I be most helpful? And just be sure that you stick with whatever that plan is. Again, so there's no disappointment and no breakdown in that relationship. So these are the types of questions. We are actually going to take some time to practice them. And we have a big enough group that I think what we'll do, check how we're doing on time. Yeah, we have a little over 10 minutes. So let's break into 2 groups. How many do we have here? Who's participating versus like working? I don't know if
People participate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2, 4, 6, 8 or so. So let's break into 4 and 4, and I'm going to give you 2 questions, 1 for each group, and we want you to try some of these types of questions out. So I'll give you an example. I think we'll use this one here. And the groups that are far away, they can pick the virtual participants. They can choose one of these and discuss within their office as well and make some notes. So the people on the left side of the room, the 4 of you are going to have this statement: I'm afraid my son might be failing his college courses. I'm not sure what to do. I'm really worried about his future. So this is someone speaking to you as the supporter. And we're going to take a few minutes and go through you guys just generating sample questions that you might ask if someone said this to you. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the other group we're going to use, let's do this one. My supervisor has been acting unethically. I'm not okay with what he's been doing, but I'm afraid to speak up. What if I lose my job? So again, the idea that these might be conversations you have with friends, with coworkers, with family. She's quickly like, I'm going to that. I'm no fool. So we'll need a writer. I encourage you guys to get up and move, and I think we'll probably pause the camera or mute it at least so they don't have to listen to all of our chatter. But we literally want you to come up and write up the ideas, and we'll review them as a group. And we'll take probably 6 or 7 minutes. Okay. All right,
Okay, that's fun.
we got everybody back. Fabulous. Are we back live to the virtual folks?
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So hopefully the virtual folks had at least half as much fun as was had in this room. Every time we do this, it takes forever to get everybody to just kind of step up and do it. And then it gets the conversation going, and it's much more fun than I think people expect. And when we do training, usually people say, can we do more of those? Wish we had enough time. And even today, I have one more, but I don't think we have enough time to get through it. So a couple of points. First, I would love for each group, if you just have one person who would share maybe one of your questions that you thought was a really strong question. So the group over here that had the son failing college courses, and you're talking to the parent. Anybody in that group have kind of a favorite question that they came up with?
I think that what makes you think he's failing is a really good one.
Right? So the response was, what makes you think that he's failing? Could be a really different conversation if the answer is, well, I got a letter from the university, or, well, he was on Facebook kind of complaining, right? Two completely different scenarios. And your questions that follow that are really going to be driven by understanding that context. Great. How about the group with the unethical supervisor? What do you think was one of your really strong questions?
The job, or the cost job.
Yep.
So we kind of came up, we thought this one says, why do you think that will cost you your job?
Yeah. Why do you think that reporting it would cost you your job? Again, if the answer is, well, there's a real history of retaliation, so I'm really worried about this, that's much different than asking that question and the person saying, well, I probably would be really well protected. Our HR department's really strong. They're really careful about this. You may be able to help dispel an unnecessary worry if that's the situation for them. What I really loved in both groups, we talk about these different types of questions, and as we laid them out today, there was directed support first, then exploratory, then action. And everyone really worked in those first two types of questions, discovering, exploring, before jumping in with solutions. In the real world, when you have someone in front of you who is stressing, upset, in pain, worried, so quickly our natural response is to jump right to, how can I fix this? Well, did you talk to the teachers? Did you talk to what about this? Could you get them a tutor, right? Whatever these answers could be. But as we talked about earlier, it's so important to understand the context and the rest of the story, and to make sure this is even really the presenting issue is the real issue. So I always really applaud the groups that don't jump into the fixing, because it's really hard to do. So making sure you step back, just like we sometimes slow down the conversation to talk about boundaries, sometimes we have to slow ourselves down to really take the time to explore. And that's going to help you provide better support. Now, if you are going to ask all of these deep, insightful, important questions, you also have to be able to listen for those answers. And that can be pretty challenging. So we take time to talk about empathetic listening. And again, we have the go-to definition of empathy, right? I can put myself in someone else's shoes. We all know that one. When we talk about empathetic listening at Firefly, it's really taking it beyond that standard definition. Empathetic listening really demonstrates your ability to recognize not just what it's like to be in their shoes, but really why that's important. All of the context around it, right? And so in that workplace scenario, it's being able to say, gosh, this sounds really, really stressful. And I know that you just got this job and you're really excited about it. So I understand why this is so hard, right? Oh, who doesn't want to be listened to in that way, right? Or, with the son that's struggling at college. Gosh, I remember that you guys have been through some of this before in school settings. So I'm sure that makes it even harder. And I know you really just want him to be successful. Yes, right? Oh, you get me. That's the kind of thing we're able to demonstrate with empathetic listening. The good thing is that sounds like a really mighty kind of skill to have, but it's not that hard. It's really rooted in asking those questions, right, that surround our ability to provide that context and understand, and then some really basic listening practices that really we all need to continually stay on top of. So best listening practice is staying engaged mentally and physically. My goodness, this is so hard in our day and age, right? It is so hard to just give focus and be present with any one thing, but these are the kinds of conversations that deserve it. So being really thoughtful about disengaging from electronics, finding a quiet place to take that call. We talk with our mentors about being thoughtful at home, at work, in the community. Where is it appropriate for you to take that call? Where is there a space that you can create that environment that you're focused? I always say, and I'm not even kidding, a lot of my phone calls are at the gas station. Like if I get a call and I'm on the road, I will always go to a gas station because all I do is sit and look at a brick wall. There's nothing interesting. Target parking lot, I'm like, what did she buy? And oh my gosh, that little kid, and right? So I've really learned about certain places, and even in my house, I know where I can and cannot take those conversations. In our office, it's a constant conversation. Hey, do you need to take or make a call? Yeah, I do. So people will step out or I'll find another place. So being really, really intentional and thoughtful. And if you're not in that space, being able to say to the person, I really want to hear what you have to say. Can I call you back in 10 minutes, in an hour, whatever, so that I can get to a place where I'm not going to be distracted? Of course, right? Again, who doesn't want that kind of treatment? The speaking thinking gap, right? This is the dynamic. I think many people are familiar with this. Your brain can process 5 times more than what it receives by someone speaking to you. This is why you've already probably today created your next to-do list in your head as we've been talking, right? What you have to do when you get home. Our brains just do that because they have such enormous capacity, and that's natural. What I encourage people to do is just be honest. The worst case scenario is you getting busted out for not listening 5 minutes down the road, right? If you're distracted, and I've said before, like, I am so sorry, that dog barking was just so distracting. But what you're saying is important. Can you tell me that again? Because I really want to understand. Okay. Yeah, it's okay that you tuned out, right? Just own it. And in particular, when you are face-to-face with someone, it's so obvious. Your friends and family can tell you exactly what you look like when you've checked out, right? They'll tell you exactly. And we've all been busted for it, right? So just remember that. And again, be honest and own it. It's so much more trust building than trying to fake that you were really listening or whatever. Using fillers, this is really important on the phone, right? It's the, are you still there? It doesn't have to be big. You don't want it to be interrupting or disruptive, but just saying, got it, yep, okay, sure, oh yeah, right? That's important. Taking a breath. Again, we're so quick to jump in and respond. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves to just slow down and breathe. And again, that message impact, I think most of us know there's a visual component when you're face-to-face. Being able to read nonverbals, that kind of stuff is huge, right? If you are over the phone, you've lost visual. If you're over email or text, all you have is the words and now emojis, right? That's the solution to this, to make sure tone is really clear. But sometimes you have to intentionally check back and make sure that the tone was right and that you're understanding. Clarifying that understanding, it's not saying what I hear you saying is, and parroting it back, right? This is where you can show that empathetic listening. Oh, so it sounds like this. And I understand that that's important because we've already talked about whatever it is. This is where you get to show that off. The other really important thing about that is sometimes for people who are in these stressful situations, they aren't clear. And so when you parrot back or you come back to them and just say, so it sounds like this is the issue. And they say, no, that's not it at all. It might be that you misunderstood. It might also be that they're just not clear. And so you need to go back through those questions again. Because sometimes we're still trying to figure out what the issue is, right? So that's important. When you're in these conversations, we really say it should be 80% of you just listening and asking those questions, and 20% of you talking or sharing your experience. If you hang up the phone and think, oh my gosh, I talked way too much, circle back and say, gosh, that was such a great conversation, but I feel like I was talking a lot. I'd love to talk with you more about this. When can we connect again so I can hear more about your experience or whatever? Very respectful. So again, we've got these guardrails: being empathetic, staying focused, clarifying understanding. Most of these things we've talked about, not one-upping with your story. There's a difference between sharing your experience and commiserating or one-upping. The other one that sometimes people will ask about is gratuitous sympathy. That's, oh, honey, oh, sweetie, right? Not very helpful. So staying away from those things. And if you do all of that kind of listening, that's what really builds the trust in the relationship, right? It creates a space for people to feel safe and explore. It encourages sharing that information, exploring, and it reduces the likelihood of those misunderstandings and tension. All of that makes sense? I mean, big stuff that comes out of some pretty typical, practical things. But again, just remembering that it's a practice. All of this, the questions, the listening, you don't become an expert in this overnight. And even the people who are, they continue working at it. It's a conscious effort. And the last piece that we always want to share is this idea about self-care. Anytime that you are helping someone and supporting someone, you need to be restoring yourself too. That's obviously really important for our mentors, but in any support relationship, this might kick up your own past experiences and emotions and tough stuff. So the handout that you guys have, I encourage you to take a look at. What I love is that it's two-sided. The first side is all about what gets in the way of you doing self-care, which probably is the longer list. Then on the back, the things you do for self-care. Most of us have 2 or 3 things that we kind of go to. Oh, I call a friend, or I go for a run, whatever that is. But I also included on that second page, there should be a link, yep, at the bottom. We had a great brainstorm session with some of our guides, our mentors, about really different types of self-care. And I encourage you to check that out because there might be some things you haven't thought of or that you used to use and you've forgotten about. So whatever you can pull into that tool belt, having those already listed, you're so much more likely to use them when you need them. And of course, all of our info, if you're interested in learning more, if you've got questions about anything we talked about today, we're going to be pretty close to the end of the time, but I'm happy to stay and answer questions. And if there's anything from the virtual folks, we're always happy to answer them too. So thanks to all of you for joining us today. I hope it was helpful. And I encourage you just to be brave and lean into those conversations that are sometimes hard. Use these questions and skills that we've refreshed today, and hopefully they will generate these great conversations for you.
Wow,
Thank you.
good job. Good job. We did some awesome golden nuggets on what to say when you don't know what to say, everybody. Yay! And guess what? Next month, our Power Lunch is going to be with Mary Schmid, who's your brilliant you, and her topic is going to be charge what you're worth and widen your financial pathway to success. Nice. So she says that we're going to discover what our money personalities may be. There's 8 of them, and how it may be undercutting your ability to charge what you are really worth. We're going to learn the neuroscience of
Neuroscience. I got that one for you. The brain science.
Of conversations to identify where you may be getting sidetracked and how to move your prospects from skeptic to partner in enrollment conversations. And we're going to discover the most overlooked decisions that you must make to stay focused on your financial success path. Does that sound cool or what?
Yeah.
Now, that's going to be October 20. Good question. Thank you. October 27th, Thursday, last Thursday of next month. The other thing is, everybody knows our amazing fearless leader, Lori Spees, is all about creating community. We have 5 free networking events every month. She's encouraging our people to get to know our people. And she's pretty amazing, isn't she, everyone?
Yes.
So please check out our website. We have a fall full of fun. I mean, literally next Thursday, we have part networking here. The following Tuesday, we now have the Uncorked. What is it called? Uncorked. The France Uncorked. Right? And that's wine.
Wine.
We drink wine and have fun there. And then, of course, we now are hosting. Last week we had our Thirsty Thursday, so that's the 3rd Thursday of the month, and that's our kegerator out at Minnetonka. It sounds like we get to have some after hours fun. And then, of course, the Power Lunch. But please check out our website. We'd love to have you attend any of our events. So great to have all of you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to both of you. This was fantastic. Have a great